The oncologist's words hit me like a freight train. Without immediate treatment, she said, you have 3 months to live. Mrs. Anderson, that same afternoon, I walked straight to my son's office. Medical papers clutched in my shaking hands. When he looked up from his computer screen and saw the expression on my face, I knew he understood this wasn't a social visit. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. The fluorescent lights in Dr. Martinez's office had been too bright, making everything feel surreal. As she explained how the aggressive cancer had already spread to my lymph nodes. We need to start treatment immediately, she said, her voice professional but kind. The specialized therapy costs $85,000. But it's your best shot at beating this thing. I'd sat there in that sterile room thinking about how I'd raised my son, David. Alone after his father abandoned us when he was 12, working double shifts as a hospital administrator just to put him through law school. And now, at 62, I needed him more than I'd ever needed anyone. David's law office occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown building, all glass, chrome, and expensive furniture that screamed success. His secretary announced me with barely concealed surprise. I never visited unannounced when I entered his corner office. He was reviewing documents, his dark hair perfectly styled, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Mom, what's wrong? He could read the panic in my face immediately. I placed the medical reports on his mahogany desk. I have cancer, David, aggressive lymphoma. Without treatment, I have 3 months. The color drained from his face as he scanned the papers. Jesus, Mom, I'm so sorry. He stood up and came around the desk to embrace me. And for a moment, I felt the relief of having my child take care of me. The treatment isn't covered by insurance, I continued, my voice steadier now. It's experimental, but it's my only chance. $85,000, David returned to his chair. The businessman mask sliding back into place. That's a lot of money, Mom. Something in his tone made my stomach clench. I know it is, I said softly. But David, I'm asking for my life. He leaned back, fingers steepled, the same gesture I remembered from when he was a boy, trying to get out of trouble. Let me talk to Jessica about it. We'll need to see what we can do. Jessica, his wife of 3 years, had never liked me much. She was the one who'd convinced him to move across town, so they wouldn't have to deal with family obligations too often. That should have been my first warning. But hope makes you overlook red flags, doesn't it? I hugged him goodbye, thinking, surely my only child wouldn't let me die for lack of money. After all, I'd sacrificed everything for him. Surely that counted for something. I was about to learn exactly how much it counted 3 days later. David called instead of visiting, which should have told me everything I needed to know. His voice sounded different, rehearsed, like he was reading from a script Jessica had written. Mom, we've been talking about your situation, our situation, I corrected gently. David, this is about your mother's life. The silence stretched uncomfortably before he cleared his throat. Right, of course. It's just that $85,000 is our entire emergency fund. Jessica's worried about what would happen if we had our own medical emergency. I stared out my kitchen window at the garden I'd been tending for 15 years, wondering if I'd live to see another spring. David, I'm not asking you to go into debt. I know you have the money. He just made partner at his firm, and Jessica worked as a pharmaceutical sales rep. They weren't hurting financially. It's not that simple, Mom. We have responsibilities, obligations. The house payment, Jessica's student loans. We're trying to start a family. Each excuse felt like a small knife to my chest. I raised you alone after your father left us with nothing, I said quietly. I worked 2 jobs to put you through law school. I never once asked you to pay me back. That was your choice, he said. And I heard Jessica's influence in those cold words. You chose to have a child. You chose to support me. I didn't ask for any of that. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. This stranger's voice couldn't be coming from my son, the boy I'd rocked through nightmares, cheered at every baseball game, celebrated with at his law school graduation. David, I'm asking for my life. $85,000 to live. My voice cracked despite my efforts to stay strong. I'll find another way, he said quickly, as if that solved everything. There are programs, charity care, payment plans. You don't need to burden us with this. Burden, that's what I'd become to my own child. After hanging up, I sat in my empty house and realized something fundamental had shifted. The son I'd raised, the man I'd been so proud of, didn't exist anymore. Or maybe he'd never existed at all, and I'd been loving an illusion. I spent the next 2 days researching every possible financial option, calling charity organizations, looking into medical loans with crushing interest rates. Every door led to a dead end or a waiting list months long. Time I didn't have. Then Jessica posted the invitation on Facebook, and everything became crystal clear. You're cordially invited to celebrate Jessica Anderson's 30th birthday extravaganza. The Facebook invitation was elegant, printed on what looked like expensive cardstock, photographed against a backdrop of white roses. Join us for an unforgettable evening at the Four Seasons Ballroom, featuring dinner, dancing, and surprises. I read it 3 times before the numbers at the bottom registered. Black tie required. Cost per couple $300. I scrolled through the comments, watching friends and colleagues RSVP enthusiastically. Can't wait. Going to be amazing. Jessica deserves the best. My hands trembled as I did the math in my head. If they were charging guests $300 per couple, and I could see 47 confirmed attendees so far, that meant I grabbed a calculator to be sure. Over $14,000 just from ticket sales for a birthday party, but that was just the beginning. I clicked through Jessica's Instagram stories from the party planning process, and each post felt like another slap. The custom floral arrangements, $15,000, the 5-course meal from the city's most exclusive caterer, $30,000, the live band she'd flown in from Nashville, $25,000, the designer dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion, $8,000. I screenshotted everything, my cancer patient hands shaking with rage. When I added it all up, the total made me physically ill, $230,000 for one night, for one woman's birthday party. Meanwhile, I was facing death because I couldn't afford $85,000 for treatment. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. David, who couldn't find $85,000 to save his mother's life, had somehow found $230,000 to throw his wife a party that would last 6 hours. I called him that evening, my voice carefully controlled. David, I saw Jessica's party invitation. It looks lovely. A pause. Oh, yeah? It's going to be nice. Jessica's been planning it for months. It must be expensive, I said casually. The Four Seasons, the catering, all those details. Well, you know Jessica, he said, sounding suddenly uncomfortable. She likes things to be perfect. He probably realized where this conversation was heading. How much is it costing, David? The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Mom, that's not really your business. Humor me. I'm curious what perfect costs these days. Another pause. It's a special occasion. Jessica only turns 30 once. David, my voice sharpened. How much? About $200,000, he mumbled. Give or take. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd already done the math. $200,000 for a birthday party, I said quietly. But you can't find $85,000 to save my life? Those are completely different situations, Mom, he argued. The party is an investment in our social network, our business relationships. An investment. My son was calling his wife's birthday party an investment, while his mother faced death. I see, I said softly. I'm glad I understand your priorities now. After I hung up, I sat in the darkness of my living room and made a decision that would change everything. If David thought I was going to die quietly and conveniently, he was wrong. I mortgaged my house the next morning. 50 years of marriage, 40 years in the same home, and I signed papers putting it all at risk for a chance to live. The bank officer, a kind woman named Mrs. Chen, seemed troubled by the urgency of my request. Mrs. Anderson, are you sure about this? At your age, a reverse mortgage might be a better option. I need the money now, I told her firmly. All of it. She processed the paperwork with professional efficiency. But I caught her glancing at me with concern when I walked out with a certified check for $92,000. My hands were steady for the first time in weeks. The oncology financial office accepted my payment without question. Dr. Martinez scheduled my first treatment for the following Monday. I'm proud of you for fighting this, Eleanor, she said, reviewing my chart. This treatment has a 73% success rate. Those are good odds, paid for with everything I owned. But as I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced since receiving my diagnosis. Hope. Maybe I would live. Maybe I'd see another Christmas, another spring in my garden. Another year of life, the same life David had been willing to let slip away. That weekend, social media exploded with photos from Jessica's birthday extravaganza. I scrolled through hundreds of images. Jessica in her $8,000 gown, the elaborate ice sculpture centerpieces, the custom cake that was apparently a replica of their house, complete with edible landscaping. David looked sharp in his tuxedo, his arm proudly wrapped around his glowing wife. In one photo, he was giving a toast, champagne glass raised, a beaming smile on his face. The caption beneath it read, "My husband's speech about how nothing is too good for the woman he loves," brought tears to everyone's eyes. Nothing too good for the woman he loved. I took a screenshot of that photo and caption, adding it to my growing folder of evidence, proof of what my life was worth to my son. Less than his wife's birthday party, the chemotherapy began that Monday. It was brutal nausea, exhaustion, and endless days that blurred together, but I pushed through with sheer determination. Each treatment cost thousands of dollars, money that had once been my home, my security, my peace of mind. But I was alive. Every morning I woke up was another day. David hadn't expected me to have a day he'd been willing to let slip away for his wife's moment of social glory. During my recovery breaks between treatments, I started planning. If I survived and Dr. Martinez said my odds were good, I knew I had to make some decisions, big ones. Like whether I even wanted a relationship with my son anymore. 6 months later, Dr. Martinez finally gave me the words I'd prayed to hear: complete remission. The cancer was gone. I sat in her office, healthy and cancer-free, realizing that through all those months of suffering, my son had never once called to ask how I was doing. He hadn't visited, hadn't even sent a card, nothing. You beat the odds, Eleanor, Dr. Martinez said warmly. How do you feel? How did I feel? Grateful, angry, relieved, devastated, but above all free. Free from the illusion that family means unconditional love. Free from the guilt of maintaining relationships that only took from me. Free from being disposable. I feel like I've been given a second chance, I told her, and I meant it. The first thing I did was sell my house. The mortgage I'd taken for treatment left me with little equity, but it was enough to start fresh. I picked Phoenix, Arizona. Warm weather, healing sun, and 1,500 miles between me and my old life. I rented a cozy apartment in a retirement community. It wasn't big or fancy, but it was mine. Paid for, peaceful. The second thing I did was vanish. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media, and left no forwarding address. When David's secretary called my old number, she'd hear it was disconnected. If he ever drove by my old home, he'd find strangers living there. For the first time in my adult life, I was invisible to the people who should have loved me most. And it felt both terrifying and liberating. That first month in Phoenix, I rested. I read books I'd never had time for, took slow walks on the desert trails, and learned how to breathe again. I made friends, too. Margaret, a retired teacher who'd lost her husband 2 years ago. Frank, a former accountant who divorced after discovering his wife had been stealing from him. Sarah, whose kids lived in Europe and rarely called. We were a small tribe of the forgotten, the left behind, but we built something beautiful together. One morning, over coffee in the community room, Frank mentioned he needed help with bookkeeping for his little investment business. I can't pay much, he said, but it's honest work. I'd always been good with numbers, and I needed something to keep me busy. That small favor turned into something bigger. Bookkeeping became investment advising, which led to managing portfolios for other residents. Turns out, when you stop living to please people who never cared, you start trusting your instincts. And mine were good. Very good. By the 6-month mark, I was making more money than I ever had in my old life, and David had no idea I was even alive, let alone thriving. A year after disappearing, I was wealthier than I'd ever dreamed possible. The investment portfolio I'd built for myself and my clients had grown by 300%, thanks to smart plays in emerging tech stocks and a well-timed bet on renewable energy. I'd even started a small financial consulting business for seniors, helping others rebuild their lives just like I had. Word spread fast, and soon I was fully booked with clients who wanted guidance from someone who understood what it meant to start over. I had beaten cancer, rebuilt my life, and most importantly, I had done it without the people who had once made me feel small. My little apartment had been replaced by a comfortable house in an upscale neighborhood, complete with a garden where I could finally grow the vegetables I'd missed. I had a new car, a solid circle of friends, and a growing bank account that proved I was far from the helpless burden David once believed me to be. But the most satisfying change wasn't material, it was internal. The woman who'd once begged her son for her life was gone. In her place stood someone harder, wiser, and completely self-reliant. I'd learned to trust my own judgment, to value my own worth, and to never again give anyone the power to decide whether I lived or died. My cancer remained in remission. My health was excellent, and my future was entirely my own. I'd built a life David couldn't touch, couldn't control, and didn't even know existed. Every morning, I woke up grateful for the second chance I'd given myself, the chance he'd been unwilling to provide. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if he ever thought about me. Did he assume I died quietly just as he'd apparently hoped? Did he feel guilty for refusing to help me? Did he even remember he had a mother? Those thoughts came less often now. I was too busy living the life I'd saved to waste much time thinking about the son who'd been willing to let me die. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. And some relationships, once you finally see them clearly, aren't worth saving. I was about to discover that David had learned that lesson too. But from the other side, 6 years after I'd vanished from his life, he found me through the one thing I couldn't hide: success. My financial consulting firm had been featured in Phoenix Business Weekly, complete with a photo of me standing in front of my downtown office. The article called me the investment whisperer and detailed how I turned struggling retirees into confident investors. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my secretary, Angela, buzzed my office. "Mrs. Anderson, there's a man here who claims to be your son. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's quite insistent." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. After 6 years of silence, David had tracked me down. "Does he look desperate?" I asked, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. "Yes, Mum," Angela replied after a pause. "He looks like he's been through hell." "Perfect. Send him in." I straightened my shoulders, ready to face the stranger who used to be my son. David walked into my office, and I barely recognized him. The confident lawyer in expensive suits was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed man in wrinkled clothes that hung loose on his frame. His hair was longer, unkempt, and there were new lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and crushing stress. "Hello, David." I didn't stand. I didn't offer him a seat. I simply waited. He stopped in the doorway, staring at me as if he were seeing a ghost. "Mom." "Jesus, I thought, we all thought you were dead." I raised an eyebrow. "How dramatic." "I'm very much alive, as you can see." He stepped closer, his eyes darting around the room, taking in the expensive furniture, the framed awards, the sweeping view of downtown Phoenix through the floor-to-ceiling windows. This is incredible. You look amazing, healthy, successful, cancer-free for 5.5 years. I said matter-of-factly. "The treatment worked beautifully." "Of course, you wouldn't know that, since you never called to check." His face crumpled, and for a moment, he looked like the 12-year-old boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was selfish. You were exactly who you are." I cut in. "Nothing more, nothing less. The question is, what do you want now?" David sank into the chair across from my desk without being invited. "I need your help," he whispered. And there it was. The real reason for his visit: not remorse, not love, not reconciliation. He needed something from me again. "Help with what, David?" My voice could have frozen water. "Everything's gone, Mom. The house, the car, the practice, everything. Jessica cleaned me out and disappeared with her personal trainer." He let out a bitter laugh. "Turns out she'd been planning it for 2 years. Moved all our money offshore, convinced me to put everything in her name for tax purposes. I was so stupidly in love. I signed whatever she put in front of me." I listened to David's story of financial ruin with the same detached expression I'd wear while reviewing a particularly dull quarterly report. Jessica had systematically destroyed him with the same calculating precision she once used to plan her extravagant birthday parties. She convinced me to mortgage the house again, to invest in her friend's tech startup. David continued, his voice hollow with shame. "Said we'd double our money in 6 months. The company never existed. It was all fake documentation, fake websites, fake investor presentations." "How much did you lose?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Everything," David said quietly. $2 million. Our entire net worth, plus what we borrowed against future earnings." He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Mom, I'm facing bankruptcy. Criminal charges. The state bar is reviewing my license. $2 million gone." I did a quick mental calculation, remembering the newspaper coverage of Jessica's birthday party 6 years ago. If they'd had that kind of money to throw around back then, David's law practice had been far more successful than I'd realized. "The personal trainer she left with," I said conversationally. "How long had that been going on?" David's hands clenched into fists. "At least 3 years, maybe longer. Brad Morrison, the guy who helped plan her birthday party. They were probably laughing at me the whole time, planning this while I was writing checks for ice sculptures and custom floral arrangements." The irony was almost poetic. Jessica had used David's money, the same money he'd claimed he couldn't spare to save his mother's life, to fund her affair and plan her escape. "Where is she now?" I asked. "Costa Rica, we think. No extradition treaty. She transferred everything to shell companies down there." David leaned forward desperately. "Mom, I know I don't deserve to ask, but I'm drowning. The lawyers want $50,000 just to start building a defense. I don't even have $50 to my name." $50,000? Less than the cost of my cancer treatment, the one he'd refused to pay for. The cosmic justice of it all was almost too perfect to fully appreciate. "And you thought of me?" I mused. "After 6 years of silence, you tracked me down because you need money." "I made a mistake," he said, tears starting to flow. "The biggest mistake of my life. I should have helped you. Should have found the money somehow." I was scared, confused, listening to Jessica instead of my own heart. You chose your wife over your mother, I said simply. People make choices, David, they live with consequences. He was crying openly now. The confident lawyer Wade completely gone. I lost everything. Mom's my marriage, my career, my reputation. My money, everything, not everything, I corrected him. You still have your life. I almost didn't have that luxury, remember? David looked up sharply, finally understanding what I was telling him. The cancer treatment worked. You survived. I survived because I saved myself, I said evenly. I mortgaged my house, paid for my own treatment, and beat cancer without any help from my loving son. I could have lost you forever. He whispered, you did lose me, I replied. 6 years ago, when you chose $85,000 over your mother's life. The woman sitting here now, she's someone else entirely. David spent the next hour begging, pleading, promising to change, to be different, to make amends for the betrayal that had cost him his family 6 years earlier. I listened with the detached interest of someone watching a moderately entertaining movie. When he finally ran out of words, I picked up my phone. Angela, please bring in the Morrison file. David looked confused. Morrison? Brad Morrison? Jessica's personal trainer turned business partner, I said calmly. You didn't think I'd let the man who helped destroy my son operate in my city without doing some research, did you? Angela entered with a thick folder which I opened slowly and deliberately. Let's see what Mr. Morrison has been up to since fleeing to Costa Rica with your wife. David leaned forward, desperate for any scrap of information about the man who'd stolen his life. Interesting story. Actually, I continued. Brad and Jessica lasted about 6 months before she cleaned him out, too. Apparently, she's quite democratic in her theft. She took his half of your money and disappeared to Venezuela. Brad made it back to the States about 2 years ago, completely broke. David's face went through several emotions before settling on bitter satisfaction. Good, I hope they both rot. Well, Brad's certainly been struggling, I said. But here's the fascinating part. I pulled out a photograph. He's been working as a personal trainer here in Phoenix at the gym 3 blocks from my office. The color drained from David's face. You knew? You knew he was here and didn't tell me? Why would I tell you anything, David? We haven't spoken in 6 years. As far as I knew, you thought I was dead. I set the photo aside. But since you're here now, perhaps you'd like to know what else I've discovered. I pulled out another document. Thick with legal language, Brad's been quite talkative about his time with Jessica, I said. Seems he's willing to testify about her financial crimes in exchange for immunity. Something about forged documents, identity theft, wire fraud across international lines. David grabbed the document with shaking hands. This could clear me if I can prove Jessica manipulated me. That I was a victim to, it could, I agreed. The federal prosecutor handling your case is particularly interested in Brad's testimony. Apparently, Jessica victimized several other men the same way. You're part of a pattern. Hope flickered in David's eyes for the first time since he'd walked into my office. Mom, how did you get this information? How did you even know to look? I smiled, and it wasn't entirely kind. David, I built a multi-million-dollar investment firm from nothing in 6 years. Did you really think I did that without learning how to gather information? Multi-million? His voice was barely a whisper. I gestured around my office. The business is worth $4.2 million. My personal portfolio is worth another $3.80, $8 million. David, built from the ashes of the life you and Jessica helped destroy. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. You're rich, really rich. I'm successful, I corrected. I'm independent. I'm beholden to no one, and no one can take what I've built away from me. It's a wonderful feeling. David sat quietly for a long time, processing everything I'd told him about Brad, about Jessica's other victims. You're going to help me? He finally asked. I closed the folder and looked at my son with eyes that had learned how to be hard. I'm going to give you a choice, David, the same kind of choice you gave me 6 years ago. Here's your choice, I said, my voice steady as granite. I have enough evidence and connections to clear your name completely. Brad Morrison is willing to testify. I know the federal prosecutor personally, and I have documentation proving Jessica's systematic fraud. I can make your legal problems disappear with one phone call. David's breathing quickened. What do you want in return? I want you to understand what it feels like to beg for your life. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a check already made out in his name. $50,000. Enough to pay for his legal defense and get him back on his feet. His eyes locked on the check like a drowning man spotting a life preserver, but there's a condition. I continued. You have to ask me for it the same way I asked you for help 6 years ago. You have to get on your knees in this office and beg your mother to save your life. The silence between us grew thick. Heavy with years of hurt and betrayal, David stared at the check, then at me, realization dawning in his eyes. You want me to humiliate myself? I want you to experience what you put me through, I said simply. The desperation, the helplessness, the knowledge that your future depends entirely on someone else's mercy. David's jaw tightened as he fought with his pride. And if I don't? Then you can walk out of here the same way you let me walk out of your life. Empty-handed and alone. This information, I held up the file on Brad Morrison, dies with me. The prosecutor never gets her star witness. You face the charges alone. For a moment, I thought he might refuse. The old David, the arrogant lawyer who'd valued his wife's birthday party over his mother's life, would have walked out in a rage, but the broken man in front of me had learned what desperation really meant slowly. David slid from his chair onto his knees beside my desk. His voice cracked as he spoke. Please, Mom, I'm begging you. Save my life. Tears streamed down his face as he went on. I was wrong 6 years ago. I was selfish and cruel, and I failed you when you needed me most. Please don't let me destroy myself the way I almost let you die. I looked down at my son, kneeling on the expensive carpet of my corner office, and felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, but sadness. This wasn't the victory I'd imagined. It was tragedy, repeating itself in a different key. Stand up, David. He climbed back into his chair, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I handed him the check and the Morrison file. Your legal problems will be resolved within the month. Brad's testimony will clear you completely. Why? He whispered. After everything I did to you, why are you helping me? I leaned back in my chair, suddenly feeling every one of my 68 years. Because I learned something about myself when I was fighting cancer alone. I learned that I'm stronger than I ever knew. But I also learned that I don't want to become the kind of person who abandons family when they're desperate. David clutched the check, fresh tears welling in his eyes. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you. No, I agreed quietly. You don't, but that's not why I'm doing it. 6 months later, David's charges were dropped. Brad Morrison's testimony had exposed Jessica's entire network of financial fraud, and David was officially classified as a victim rather than a co-conspirator. The state bar restored his license, and he started a small practice specializing in elder law and fraud recovery. He called me every Sunday now, not asking for anything, just checking in. The conversations were still awkward, still careful, but they were real in a way our relationship had never been before. We were both different people now, shaped by loss and betrayal and the hard-won understanding that love isn't unconditional. I have something for you, David said during one of our calls. I've been working on it for months. The next week, he flew to Phoenix with a cashier's check for $85,000. It's not enough, he said, handing it to me in my office. It'll never be enough to make up for what I did. But it's exactly what I should have given you 6 years ago, plus interest. I looked at the check, then set it aside. David, I don't need your money anymore. I know, he said softly. But I need to give it to you. Not because you need it, but because I need to prove to myself that I'm not the man who let his mother face cancer alone. We talked for hours that day, really talked for the first time since he was a child. He told me about the depression that had consumed him after Jessica left, the therapy he'd started, and the slow process of rebuilding his sense of self-worth. I told him about my business, my friends in Phoenix, and the life I'd built from nothing. I'm proud of you, he said as he got ready to leave. I know I don't have the right to be, but I'm proud of the woman you've become. I'm proud of the man you're becoming, I replied. Not the man you were, but the man you're choosing to be now. As I watched his taxi disappear into the Phoenix traffic, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. 6 years ago, I'd faced death alone because my son chose money over my life. Now, he'd lost everything and finally discovered what really mattered, not wealth or status or social connections, but the people who stand by you when everything falls apart. I'd saved myself, built a fortune, and proven I didn't need anyone's rescue. But in the end, the most valuable thing I'd gained wasn't money or success or independence. It was the knowledge that I was strong enough to forgive without forgetting, to help without enabling, and to love without surrendering my self-worth. Some lessons cost everything to learn. David had learned his, and in teaching it to him, I'd learned something too, that sometimes the most powerful victory isn't defeating your enemies, but showing them a better way to be human. Life had taught him a hard lesson. I'd taught him a harder one. But in the end, we'd both learned the hardest lesson of all, that family isn't about blood or obligation, but about choosing to stand by each other even when it costs everything you have. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.